Oh my God. Okay. The ending of this story is crazy. I kind of can't wait to get to it because I feel like you guys are going to freak. But yeah, so we're covering Defenders Beyond, right? We basically finished Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals. So now we need a new series to start. So here's the thing, right? Let's just kind of get into this, right? So what ends up going on here is this takes place after the death of Stephen Strange, right? If you guys remember that story that we covered, Stephen Strange is dead in Marvel Comics, and his role was basically taken over by Clea, who was at one point his apprentice, then she became his girlfriend, then his wife, and then they got a divorce, and they've kind of been basically friends with benefits ever since. And so she's like the new Doctor Strange. Stephen Strange is out, but what ends up happening here is one of the things that Stephen Strange had done is he had kind of left these instances where he had kind of foreseen these events unfolding, different things that were going to take place over the course of the universe, and kind of left a portion of himself beyond. I mean, if we're being honest here, it's a plot device, right? It's one of the things you got to notice about this story by Al Ewing. He really has fun with it more so than anything else, which is kind of the best way to handle this kind of stuff. But what ends up going on here is Stephen Strange basically visits Blue Marvel Adam Brashear. And this is a cool moment because this is something that you don't really see all that often, right? When it comes to Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel in Marvel Comics, he's always one of these characters where he's kind of fringe to a degree. You don't see him all that often, but when you do, it's usually because something's popping off. Like in the Doctor Doom solo series, when Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel, fights Doctor Doom. And yes, we are going to cover that because that story is amazing. It is like the best Doctor Doom story ever. But what goes on here is you basically have Adam Brashear in his underwater base, right? For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with him, his base of operations is actually down in the ocean. It kind of allows him to basically operate in peace. And he's met by what is in effect the spirit of Stephen Strange that basically starts presenting him tarot cards with the intention of basically bringing back the Defenders. Now, it wasn't always that way in Marvel Comics, right? The idea of like the tarot cards and the Defenders, that didn't become a thing until the 1990s. The original Defenders team was kind of a loose-knit coming together of superheroes for a particular purpose, and that was supposed to be it. It became so popular that Marvel actually kept it as an on-running series that went on for a long time. The Defenders was immensely popular when it was running in Marvel. Now, over time, the series became unpopular because basically writers, different writers just kind of screwed it up. But in the 2000s, Marvel tried to bring it back. And what they gave us was Doctor Strange's Secret Defenders. And so what Doctor Strange would do is that when there was some kind of a calamity, say for example, like Dormammu was coming back or something like that, he would just start drawing tarot cards and he would assemble a team. It was an amazing concept that was terribly executed. Doctor Strange would assemble a team that had like Wolverine and Spider-Man and like Cyclops and somebody else. I'm just arbitrarily drawing names here, but he would literally just assemble a team of characters that you would never expect to see team up, and they would go face a villain that you would never expect to see them face off against. It was great, and I absolutely loved it. But the thing about this is that this is where all that comes from. And so hitting up Adam Brashear, there are a few things that Adam Brashear takes note of. For example, Eternity Mask, right? The Eternity Mask is a really cool concept in Marvel Comics. The way this works is that the wearer of the Eternity Mask immediately has a level of power that matches whoever they're facing off against. So if like some random dude named Chris, who's literally just walking down the street, stumbles across the Eternity Mask, he could put it on, and then if he were to fight like Worldbreaker Hulk, he would immediately have as much power as Worldbreaker Hulk has. That would actually change based on how powerful the Worldbreaker Hulk becomes. If he faced off against Galactus, he would immediately be as powerful as Galactus. It really is just kind of a MacGuffin in comics, but it is cool. It's a really, really interesting thing. But immediately, one of the things to know is that Adam Brashear is a man of science. So when he's met by this kind of disembodied spirit in the form of an orb from Stephen Strange, it's like, hey, Blue Marvel, I need you for a magical mission. His immediate response is like, no, that's ridiculous. I'm not going off on some magic mission because a mystical orb told me so. But the reason why Doctor Strange is approaching Blue Marvel is because the threat they're dealing with doesn't necessarily exist within the multiverse itself. It actually exists beyond the multiverse. Beyond the multiverse. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Told you this story was going to be amazing. So here's what goes on, right? So literally what Doctor Strange says is, because of the various things that you faced off against, right? The first cosmos, which we'll cover all that stuff as we get further on into this, because all that comes back, man, right? The first firmament, the aspirants, the celestials, it all gets revisited here. This story's fantastic. God, I love this story so much. But he says, like, you face off against some of the most powerful beings in existence, right? Anti-Man Connor Sims, who basically just like demolished the Avengers. And when I say demolished, I mean, that doesn't even begin to tell it, right? Like, literally, this guy just KO'd the Avengers, like the most powerful Avengers, the Sentry, Carol Danvers, kind of, which is important. I guess she doesn't really matter, but like basically, like he KO'd pretty much all the heavy hitters of the Avengers. Anti-Man was on a whole different level, and then he became the Herald of Galactus, which amped his power up even more. The guy could enter and leave the multiverse at will. It was crazy how powerful Connor Sims became. But like Adam Brashear's faced off against some major guys, and that's why he's here, right? That's why Stephen Strange approaches him. But again, a lot of this is really just kind of Adam Brashear blowing it all off and considering it to be ridiculous until he looks back at the deck of tarot cards and realizes a card has been flipped over beyond his will, meaning he didn't do it, somebody did, and the card seemed to have flipped on its own. And the reality is that it basically shows the dead body of America Chavez. Now, the reason why this matters is because when Al Ewing was writing the Ultimates, America Chavez was on that team. If you guys never saw, if you never read the Ultimates, we covered that. I'll have the playlist down in the description. Make sure you go check that out at the end of this video, because the Ultimates is phenomenal. To give you guys perspective, in the first story arc of the Ultimates, the team, right, so like basically Blue Marvel, Black Panther, America Chavez, Spectrum, Monica Rambeau, Carol Danvers, America Chavez, like they all overpower Galactus in the first arc. It's kind of nuts. It's ridiculous. It only gets more insane from there. Like the Molecule Man comes back, who's ridiculously OP. It's a phenomenal story. But the thing about this is that you end up having him coming to this realization that there really is more going on here, which is really crazy because America Chavez pops up just at that point in time. Now, one of the things going on here is that America Chavez's powers aren't really what they used to be, meaning she can't really jump through realities the way she was able to before. That was covered in America Chavez Made in the USA. We're not going to cover that because that story sucks, but that's basically what goes on there, right? Like her powers are basically diminished. And so as a result of that, she literally hits up Adam Brashear for help, and Adam Brashear sends her away because realizing what's going on with like these tarot cards and magical prophecies, that if America Chavez stays with Adam Brashear, she's going to end up dying. But the truth about this is that once these events are set in motion, meaning once the cards are drawn, there's no way to undo it, right? Like everything is going to happen now. And that's when Adam Brashear starts looking through the cards and starts seeing Loki. He starts seeing Taaia, which is kind of crazy. And Loki and Taaia both show up, right? Now, Loki, for the most part, is a little bit of a nuance here. We'll explain him here in a second. What's going on with Taaia is she's basically the mother of Galactus. That happened during the events of the first Defenders run. We can cover it if you're interested, because I feel like some of you guys are kind of like, wait, what? The mother of Galactus? Yeah, like Galactus's mom, right? She basically joins up with the Defenders. It's kind of interesting. It's a little wonky. It's a really, really cool story. We just hadn't really covered it. For this version of Loki, this is actually a time-displaced Loki, and it goes back to the events of Secret Wars. So for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with that story, before Secret Wars actually happened, when Jonathan Hickman was writing Avengers: The New Avengers, Marvel actually had a series of other stories going at the same time, which was called Last Days. And it was basically, here's what's going on with different superheroes or different characters in the universe in like the days and weeks leading up to like the end of the multiverse, the collapse of everything, and like the start of Secret Wars. For the character of Loki, he was accompanied by a chick named Verity. She's not really important here. For the character of Loki, what had happened is that following the events of Siege on Asgard, when the Loki that we had always known had basically been killed, that version of Loki was reborn as what was basically the god of stories instead of the god of lies. He did have his own set of events that were going on. Honestly, that was probably the coolest version of Loki that we'd ever seen in Marvel Comics. He was literally going on missions to make up for all of his past misdeeds, which was cool. And so what ended up happening is that during the Last Days event, Loki ended up leaving and going outside the multiverse. And then once the Last Days story arc ended in Agents of Asgard, he basically opened a door to see what came next. Now, the intention at that point in time is it was basically him skipping everything. It was basically Loki saying, okay, he's skipping past Secret Wars, opening the door, and then going into the reborn multiverse. What Al Ewing did, as part of Defenders is he said, actually, before Loki showed up after Secret Wars was over, he basically left. He ended up, going back to the universe that came before, and that's how Loki's here, right? That's why Loki's here at the moment. So it's really kind of a detour, right? So like you're in California, you're driving down to Florida to Disney World. Instead of going straight to Disney World, you stop and you go to Texas for whatever reason makes sense to nobody but yourself, because who the hell would want to go there? But you stop in Texas for a little bit. That's what this is, right? It's the equivalent of Loki making a side stop in Texas. And so what this team basically assembled, because everybody's here, that like literally the entire mission is kind of etched in stone. Like there's no way to undo this now, right? Like they're literally charted on this course, and a series of events outside of their control are going to start happening that will force them here. And so as a result of that, one of the first things that pops off is basically the portal to the neutral zone ends up going awry. Now, the way the neutral zone's been handled in Marvel Comics has shifted over the years. So one of the things to know, and I believe we covered this, but I'm not 100% sure, that one of the things we found out is that when it came to the Blue Marvel, he actually had a son named Kevin. He actually had two sons, one named Max and one named Kevin. But his son Kevin had basically been sucked inside the neutral zone, and there was no real conceivable means of getting him out. And so at that point in time, the way the neutral zone was established in Marvel Comics is that it was a place outside the multiverse, but led to what was basically the omniverse, right? So a collection of multiverses, and really it was just an uncharted place, an uncharted realm. We didn't really know anything about it. We just knew that it was a place where matter and antimatter coalesced. The hypothesis among fans is that because Kevin Brashear exists in that realm, if he's able to return to the main Marvel universe and simultaneously use all the power that he's accumulated or that has kind of infused with his body while he was in the neutral zone, he'd be the most powerful force to ever exist in the history of Marvel Comics. Like, everybody would fall before him. His power would dwarf everyone, right? Literally every character you've ever seen or heard of in Marvel, regardless of the level of power they have, up to and presumably including the one above all, would be dwarfed by the power of Kevin Brashear. Because at the end of the day, the one above all is the one who created the entirety of the multiverse. What happens when you're a being who's powerful enough to basically leave the purview of the one above all and achieve a level of power that exceeds that of the one above all? But again, that's all just a fan theory. There's been nothing to solidify that. But what ends up going on here is the neutral zone is basically a place, kind of an intermediary, right? So you leave the multiverse, you go into the neutral zone, and then from the neutral zone, you can go into anywhere beyond the multiverse. And so that's really what they're looking at here. The kicker to all this is that with them being sucked into the portal, the first thing they come across, or the first being they encounter, is eternity. And eternity literally tells them, okay, like you guys are basically in liminal space at the moment, meaning you're within the universe itself, but you're transitioning beyond the universe. I can essentially allow you to pass because the threat that you're facing off against exceeds anything that can basically thwart it within the universe, right? Like you have to pass through me to get there, and I'm going to let you because this threat's bad enough. You guys need to deal with it. And so as a result of that, they pass through eternity, they exit the universe, and they end up basically in what lies beyond the multiverse. Initially, all they encounter is darkness. And it's really Adam Brashear kind of giving us this explanation and saying that like everything's gone, right? There is nothing there. They're passing through all these different things. Now, this method of passage where you're seeing them going through what's basically darkness, this is another instance where things shift, right? So for example, when the Far Shore was introduced in Marvel Comics, which is basically where cosmic entities go to die, that the method of transporting there, that was one of those instances where you literally had like transluminal space. So you would see like just these bright lights and all kinds of different stuff passing by you and so on and so forth. It was literally just kind of a combination of all kinds of crazy things, right? It's just bright lights and shapes and just sort of indiscernible stuff. And so having darkness here is just another way to show the same process, but just showing it in the form of darkness. It's a little weird, it's a little wonky, but it is a cool thing. But what goes on is that as Adam Brashear literally gives us this explanation, right? He's like, I don't know exactly what's happening here. I can't even see anything, so I don't even know where we are, right? We're literally flying through what is in effect space and time, and then eventually moving beyond it. And so he's like, is it happening now? Is it happening then? It's really more him just kind of talking to himself to a degree. And he even goes as far as to say, like, we're moving faster and faster, and then we're going faster yet again. The void of nothing flips on an invisible axis. We're crossing a threshold, coming in for a landing. Then there's a voice in the darkness. If I were a younger man, I'd think it was the voice of God. But I've been around for a minute. I know better than that. I know it's trouble. And the voice simply says, I am from beyond. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Beyonder has returned. And here's the thing. It's not even just the Beyonder who's returned. We'll find out in the next video that we do. It's the Beyonders. The race of Beyonders are back in Marvel Comics. And for those of you guys who were unfamiliar with this, the last time we saw the Beyonders, they killed the multiverse. So God only knows what's gonna happen next, but I will say this. You think Blue Marvel's been powerful so far? You haven't seen anything yet, because this guy gets to a whole new level of power that just defines the word broken. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Defenders Beyond, and the ending of the story is nuts. Oh my God, it's so good. The story itself is amazing. It's just ridiculously awesome. But what this does here is this basically picks up with one of the Beyonders, and I say that because we're gonna see more, but it picks up with one of the Beyonders and kind of the main Beyonder basically talking to the Defenders and kind of giving us a sort of new origin for everything. Now, what Al Ewing does here is he blends the origin of all things in existence from his Ultimates run with the Beyonders themselves. So for those of you guys who saw our videos on Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, oh my God, that story, or you saw our videos on Al Ewing's Ultimates, bear with me here because we're gonna kind of bring this together for people who haven't. So the idea behind this is what the Beyonder says in the beginning, there was the first firmament. Now the way this origin worked in Al Ewing's Ultimates, and he really again is kind of carrying it over here, the first firmament was basically created by the one above all. That's the only real indication that we ever get when it comes to its existence. But the idea is the first firmament was basically the only thing in existence. You can call it a universe if you want to. And what the first firmament did is it created a group of beings that were called the aspirants. And these aspirants were monochrome in nature, right? They were black and white, and that was it. The idea behind this is that the aspirants traveled around the universe. They created galaxies, stars, solar systems, planets, life, all that kind of stuff. But whenever they created anything, they went to the first firmament and they sought its approval. If the first firmament hated what the aspirants had done, then the aspirants would destroy their creation and they would start over. If the first firmament approved of the creation, then that creation would continue on. But there was a subsect of the aspirants who actually disagreed with the idea of seeking approval for the creations and believed that things should change and evolve and grow. And so what this subsect did is it gave themselves colors and a different form and started calling themselves the Celestials. And then ultimately a holy war broke out, a war between those who were faithful to the first firmament and those who were not. The Celestials ultimately won, but in doing so shattered the first firmament into an infinite number of pieces, and that's where the first multiverse comes from. And so when that happened, the birth of the first multiverse led to an infinite number of possibilities. And that's why, as the Beyonder explains this, he says that what we got was a multiverse of possibility, where each what if would become its own what is. Because prior to the multiverse, it was just, what if this happened? What if that happened? And you would never find out. But when the multiverse came into existence, it was, what if this happened? And then that what if became its own universe, meaning it became what is. And so as time progressed, this is where the origin of the Beyonders comes into play. And it's a part that might prove to be a little controversial because of the fact that a holy war did break out between the aspirants and the Celestials. In order to prevent a holy war like that happening again, seemingly the end of all things, the Celestials created the Beyonders. And the idea was that the Beyonders were created with such a level of power they could destroy the Celestials if they needed to, hence the reason why they were a failsafe. It wouldn't make any sense for the Celestials to create a group of beings that could prevent any kind of a celestial war from happening if those beings were incapable of destroying Celestials. And so ultimately what ended up happening is when the Beyonders were created by the Celestials, they literally just existed out there, right, in the Beyondverse, as just kind of a thing where it was like a failsafe, right? If things pop off between the Celestials, a great big huge war takes place, and all things could be jeopardized, the Beyonders could step in, they could annihilate those Celestials, recreate them, and then leave again, right? That's literally all it would be. The kicker about all this, and what's so interesting, is you literally have the question that's asked by Blue Marvel in them, right? Like, they're kind of like, okay, so how do you reconcile basically the destruction of the seventh cosmos, i.e. Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and Secret Wars in 2015? But before we get to that answer, one of the things that's really kind of asked here is this Beyonder they're talking to is it the same Beyonder from the original Secret Wars in 1984? And the response to this Beyonder is, yes, I am definitively that Beyonder, but I'm the more adult version. Now, here's where things get interesting, right? And here's where we kind of bring in Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and reconcile those things. So when Jonathan Hickman wrote Avengers and New Avengers, and he introduced the Ivory Kings, the Beyonders, whatever you want to call them, right? The White Lords of Wild Space, which I still say is one of the coolest names for the Beyonders in the history of Marvel Comics. When that whole thing happened, what we didn't know was how you reconcile the Beyonders with the Beyonder that we saw before. And while Hickman did that in a pretty significant way, or pretty basic way, like literally it was Black Panther analyzing it and saying that version of the Beyonder was a child unit, or at least I think it was Hank Pym who said it maybe. The important thing is he didn't really go that far in reconciling them. What Al Ewing does here is he says, okay, so when it comes to this original Beyonder, that when the Molecule Man Owen Reese first gained his powers, he did so by basically puncturing a hole into the Beyondverse without realizing it. He was basically creating a cosmic cube and didn't know it. And so where half that power went into the Molecule Man, the other half of that power was basically the Beyonder, which was still in an infant state. But because that hole was punched, that hole remained, which meant that this baby Beyonder, if you want to call it that, looked through that hole and saw the entirety of the Marvel multiverse on the other side, and was exceedingly curious about it. And that's why the Beyonder did what it did during Secret Wars in 1984. And that's why that Beyonder seems brand new. It doesn't understand superheroes. It's easily manipulated by Doctor Doom, different things along those lines, right? It's more curious about superheroes than anything else. Why do good guys fight bad guys? Why do good guys fight good guys, right? Why do things like that happen? The reason why this Beyonder looks the way it does right now with like the great big huge silver shoulder straps and all that kind of stuff is because that's the last form that it took before we basically saw its non-existence, right? Before it seemingly ceased to exist. When we saw it in Secret Wars 2, and then the unofficial Fantastic Four Secret Wars follow-up, which basically saw the Beyonder and Molecule Man merging into a cosmic cube together. By and large, Al Ewing is ignoring that Fantastic Four story, so we can also ignore it as well. But basically, this form that we see with the Beyonder, it's the last time we saw it in terms of its physical appearance. And so it's kind of cool here, because one of the things that the Beyonders say here is that in this place where the Defenders are at, they're beyond the multiverse. And the reality is they cannot observe the Beyonders in their most pure form. So that's why the Beyonders took on a physical form made of matter in order to communicate with them. It's not that dissimilar from what the cosmic entities do. What the cosmic entities do is they go to a realm called the Dimension of Manifestations, and they meet with a being called Anthropomorpho. And Anthropomorpho gives them a physical form that their quote-unquote concept can house, and then they appear in the main Marvel universe. It's just one of those things that takes place. That was established back in the old Quasar comics in the early 1990s. But the thing about this is that's why the Beyonders appear the way they do, is because it's really the only way that these guys could understand them. And so following back to our question where they ask about Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, the collapse of the multiverse, the grand experiment, is that in that story, what Jonathan Hickman had established is that the origin of Molecule Man Owen Reese is exact across every universe. It's the exact same origin. And the reason for that is because what the Beyonders wanted to do is they wanted to basically ensure that someone like the Molecule Man could basically house an astronomical amount of power. Because remember, Owen Reese was powerful enough where he was powerful on a multiversal level. He was astronomically powerful. But when he dies, right, when he is destroyed, he wipes out a whole universe in the process. The idea of the Beyonders was to detonate the Molecule Man Owen Reese across every single universe and blow up every universe and destroy the multiverse in the process. At the time that Jonathan Hickman wrote that story, it was just an experiment and that was it. What Al Ewing establishes here is that there was actually a motivation behind it, that the reality, and it's not really overly explained here, it's just kind of a more of a hand-wavy thing than anything else. But what the Beyonders were doing is what was basically called a controlled demolition. Like when a city destroys a building, it was literally one of those things where they were like, it was time for the seventh cosmos to end, right? We had to end it so that we could basically stop some major coming threat called the Dominion. And we don't exactly know what it is, but it's just some major threat that exists out there that's going to arrive. And when it does, basically everything's going to be destroyed. The hopes of the Beyonders was to basically basically keep that threat from coming at bay by destroying the 7th cosmos. But as we know, while the 7th cosmos was destroyed, right, the multiverse did die, Doctor Doom seized the power of the Beyonders for himself. He brought everything back, or most everything back, in the form of Battleworld, and then at the end of Secret Wars, the power of the Beyonders was taken from Doctor Doom by the Molecule Man, given to Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, and Reed Richards set everything back. That by and large, what it basically meant is everything was effectively reset to the way it was before the events of Avengers and New Avengers ever happened, meaning the threat of the Dominion remains. It was never stopped. And so as a result of that, while this is a kind of new concept, we didn't know about the Dominion before, that ultimately the superheroes literally secure their own demise. And so at the moment, the Beyonders are actually trying to figure out a way to stop the Dominion from appearing, because they know if they were to try to initiate some major multiversal cataclysm like they did before, that ultimately there'd be no way of stopping it. The superheroes would ultimately prevent it from happening, right? Secret Wars would happen all over again. And so one of the crazy things that goes on is that you do have this bit of a discussion, and for the Beyonders themselves, they appear very human in nature, right, in terms of how they communicate, how they talk, how they act, because it's a way that human beings would be able to identify with. That the thing about this is the Beyonders intend to destroy the Defenders, because if the Defenders travel further, it could complicate whatever plans the Beyonders have. Now, the reason why the Beyonders want to even destroy the Defenders in the first place, beyond complicating their plans, is they know the Defenders will try to push further beyond the Beyondverse, which is really kind of an interesting thing, because in Marvel Comics, there was no indication that there was anything beyond the Beyondverse outside of like the Far Shore, right, where like cosmic entities go to die. That was it, right? The Far Shore is as close as you get to the realm of the One Above All, and even depending on who's telling the story, it in fact is the realm of the One Above All, right? It really just kind of depends on what's going on. But the thing about this is that the Defenders will try to push further. They'll try to go beyond. And as a result of that, the Beyonders trying to destroy them right now will basically keep that from happening. And so Blue Marvel gives America Chavez the Eternity Mask, because remember, the Eternity Mask, it's basically a plot device, right? It's just a giant MacGuffin. It'll allow whoever's wearing it to have power on par with whoever they're fighting. What this establishes is that there's no limit to the level of power that the Eternity Mask can copy, because you literally have America Chavez who gets into a hand-to-hand fight with the Beyonder itself. But while she's dealing with the main Beyonder, you in turn have the other Beyonders that try to destroy the Defenders. Now, the cool thing about this, and kind of a caveat here, is remember, Loki is now the god of stories, which means that Loki controls the narrative. It's basically a metatextual way of Al Ewing saying, like, Loki controls what happens in a story. So it's really kind of a weird thing, because at this point, Loki's like, you're now confined to the stories that I create. And if the story that I create says, we as the Defenders will find a way to destroy you, then that means we as the Defenders will find a way to destroy you, right? Like, that's going to happen. There's no conceivable way to stop it. It's simply just a matter of time. Now, it's kind of one of those open-ended things where maybe the Defenders like die here, they come back at some future point in time, and they destroy the Beyonders then. We don't really know. Like, it's just one of those things where their defeat is governed. So literally everything that you see transpiring from this point going forward is being done so based on the story narrative that Loki has created. I know it's kind of weird, it's a little wonky. Al Ewing can be a little zany with how he writes his stories. The content in the stories is amazing, but the way he tells them is a little weird, right? If you don't believe me, look no further than the Immortal Hulk. Because literally at the end of that story, we find out what happens when the One Above All hulks out. And basically he becomes the One Below All, and is kind of nuts. But as this Beyonder is trying to destroy the different members of the Defenders, Blue Marvel basically charges up and destroys this Beyonder himself, right? Literally, Blue Marvel kills a Beyonder. Now, he does, but he doesn't, right? Like, he basically destroys the physical form of the Beyonder. But the reality here is that these guys are living raw power, right? Just raw creation in its most pure form. They cannot be truly annihilated and destroyed. They can only ever be destroyed in the moment, right? Temporarily. That's all they can ever really do. But because it is a body made of matter, and Blue Marvel is a living antimatter reactor, it's literally just a knife punching holes in cheese. That's all it is, right? Just it's a hot knife through butter. So he just destroys this physical form of the Beyonder, and that's basically it. Now, eventually it does reconstitute itself, but they also realize that there's basically a portal that the Beyonders have that will allow the Defenders to transport beyond, right? To move beyond. And so literally, the Defenders end up traveling through this portal, and then the kind of main Beyonder from Secret Wars follows them. And what they end up doing, and it's really one of these crazy things, the Beyonders ask the question, the Broken One gives chase, right? The Broken Beyonder is what they call him. And they ask, should we prevent this? And the statement's made, don't succumb to narrative forces. We have done all we can. If the Defenders choose to traverse beyond the beyond, they have chosen the path of trial. They have chosen fire. And so what we're literally told here is fire and limitless light, yawning wide for eternity's defenders, as Taaia opens herself up for the white-hot heart that turns a cosmos and speaks life at the edge of life's end. And so she's met by this kind of disembodied voice, and it seemingly takes her over, right? Literally, it says, you called out in defiance of death, I heard, and I came. Now, anybody who's familiar with Marvel Comics, anybody who knows anything about Marvel Comics in relation to Chris Claremont's run of the X-Men, you know exactly who this is, because you've seen this statement before. You've read this statement before, where a person was dying and their mind called out in defiance of death for some form of aid, and a figure appeared that saved them and everybody else they knew from death. And so suddenly you have this figure who appears to the Defenders and says, Defenders, hear me, no longer am I the science ear that you knew. I am Taaia no more. I am fire and life incarnate, now and forever. I am the Phoenix. Quite literally, the Defenders have traveled to the White Hot Room. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what the White Hot Room is, you'll find out next week. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Defenders Beyond, and Blue Marvel fights the Phoenix Force. Plus, we're also going to find out how the Beyonder ranks in comparison to the Phoenix. I'm curious to see how you guys respond. So, as we covered in the last video, basically Blue Marvel, the Defenders and them had come across the Beyonders, and we got what was in effect the new origin of the Beyonders in Marvel Comics. They were effectively created by the Celestials and given enough power to ensure they could destroy the Celestials if they needed to. And so what we ended up finding at the end of that story is that the Defenders passed through the Beyonders and into the next stage of existence, right, the higher planes as it was called, and into the White Hot Room. Now, this requires a bit of a discussion here, and this is one of the things I wanted to hold off until this video. So in Marvel Comics, a lot of you guys are aware of the Phoenix Force, even if you don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the Phoenix Force. The idea behind the Phoenix is that there is only one Phoenix Force throughout the entirety of the multiverse and even Omniverse. But in Marvel Comics in recent years, they've used multiverse and Omniverse interchangeably, so they more or less mean the same thing in Marvel Comics now. But the idea behind it is there's only ever one Phoenix Force, just like there's only one living tribunal. The idea behind the Phoenix, though, is that it represents the sum total of all life that has ever, currently does, and will ever exist throughout the multiverse. Now, we know just by nature of the history of Marvel Comics, not even including Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, that the multiverse does have an end date. It will end naturally at some point in time. So that's how Marvel creates a sort of cap to the power of the Phoenix. But when you're talking about a level of power that high, the cap on the Phoenix Force's powers is so astronomically up there, you might as well consider that it doesn't even exist, because there'd be very, very few instances where you would see the Phoenix Force go up against a level of power that it just cannot handle. The only real exception to this is when the Phoenix takes on a physical host. The perfect host was Jean Grey, right? That's why Jean Grey and the Phoenix are so synonymous. It has taken on the bodies of beings like Quentin Quire, or at least in an alternate reality it did. In an alternate reality, Franklin Richards became the Phoenix. Rachel Summers is a popular host for the Phoenix, but the Phoenix's ability to utilize those avatars is relative to what the avatar's bodies can handle. So it's like pouring water in a glass. If you pour too much, it's going to overflow. The overflow equivalent in Marvel Comics is that physical being dying, right? That's basically what that is. And so the White Hot Room is basically this place within the multiverse whereby the Phoenix Force resides. It's its home. And it's in the White Hot Room that the Phoenix Force is at the absolute peak of its power. And so one of the things to know is that as they pass into this place, they are in the White Hot Room. It's where the Phoenix is its most capable. You'll never find the Phoenix Force ever being more powerful than it is when it's in the White Hot Room. Now, the first person that we initially pick up with is Tigra, and Tigra doesn't fully understand what's going on here. Instead, they've all seemed to have kind of arrived in different locations, really within the White Hot Room, if there is such a thing. And the result is that Tigra initially communicates with the Phoenix, right? Literally, the Phoenix pops up and it says, I am fire and life incarnate, and my wings beat thunder. I am the glory at the heart of all things, the roaring flame of mercy and terrible judgment. Beyond me, there is darkness, human, darkness without end. Do you understand? Now, here's the thing to understand. There is a realm beyond the realm of the Phoenix, and that's something that I hope you guys are really picking up on here with what Al Ewing's doing. He's kind of building it in layers, right? He's like, there's the main Marvel Universe. Beyond the main Marvel Universe, there is the multiverse. Beyond the multiverse, there's the Beyondverse. Beyond the Beyondverse, there is the White Hot Room. Beyond the White Hot Room is a place that we will see at the end of this comic and actually in the next comic as well. What's ironic about that is that if you have an eagle eye in Marvel Comics, really in the events leading up to Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, or really Secret Wars, you know what room we're talking about. It's a really, really cool place. It's a place that the Silver Surfer visited once. So it's a really awesome location. But the thing about this is we switch over to Adam Brashear. Now, Adam Brashear, in communicating with the Phoenix Force, is one of these cool things because Adam kind of asked, where you have like this construction worker who's building things and working on stuff, Adam asked the question, is that being an avatar of you? Now, the reality of this is that Al Ewing is sort of building on an old story that was done back in the day, where basically Jean Grey had met Mistress Death in the form of a guy. Now, I want to say it was during Dark Phoenix. That's one of those eras of Marvel Comics where, as much as I love the X-Men, the memories do get a little murky, and so I can't necessarily recall. The location of the comic isn't overly important here. What is important is that when Jean Grey met Death, that Death was actually building these pillars in her own realm. And these pillars were basically the afterlife for every individual being who died. Now, that was Chris Claremont's depiction of the realm of death. It has different depictions based on who you're talking to. If you read a comic by Jim Starlin that features Thanos in the realm of Mistress Death, it'll be shown one way, right? So it really depends on who's drawing and writing and interpreting the story and so on and so forth. But the important thing here is that what the Phoenix says is the reason why this construction worker's building is because the job of the Phoenix is to always build. Now, that's true, and that's been a thing since Grant Morrison's Here Comes Tomorrow during his new X-Men run. The idea behind the Phoenix, by and large, right, while it does exist and it does have an incredible amount of power, when Grant Morrison initially introduced the quote-unquote core rule of the Phoenix, that it was very, very nebulous, right? It was just like, I exist to fix what's broken. Well, what the hell does that mean, Grant Morrison? Like, I mean, nobody knows what that, like, what does it mean to fix what's broken? Like, what if something's kind of broken a little bit, but not really, right? If a glass is cracked, do you take it to a person who's going to be able to, like, fix it? Or do you just say, you know what? We'll wait till it starts leaking water. Like, how does that work, right? I mean, how do you square that circle? And so the role behind the Phoenix is that it's always building basically new universes, new places where people can reside, where life can grow. So it's kind of the wellspring of all existence. And so Adam Brashear, ever the scientist, really has more questions than anything else. And the answers that he gets are just very, very nebulous and very ambiguous, right? He's literally like, he asks a question, so what does that make him, right? The construction worker, your creation, an aspect of your being. And the response of the construction worker is, I am as I am, Adam Brashear, and I'm working. There's always the new to build on the old, always the schedule to keep. And so his question is, so you're God or you're death? Am I getting warm at least? Like, give me some kind of an answer. And he doesn't really get one. But from here, we switch over to America Chavez. Now, America Chavez, of course, is also visited by the Phoenix. And as she's making her way through this kind of endless desert, the Phoenix literally tells her, you've lost what it was that made you unique. You can get it back, but it's going to be a very, very arduous task. Now, what the Phoenix is referring to here is that when America Chavez was initially introduced into Marvel Comics, she was a character that had the ability to jump through realities. That was her thing. Much like what you saw in Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness, a giant star would appear, she'd jump through it, that star was a portal, she'd end up somewhere else. Initially, it happened without her ability to control to a degree. As time progressed, she gained more control over it, and that allowed her to jump in and out of whatever reality she wanted to, so long as she was aware of where it was. And so as a result of that, it's really Al Ewing saying the ability for her to regain her powers does exist, and that will eventually happen. It'll just take a little bit before it does. At that point, we switch over to Loki and the Beyonder. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting here, and I'm really curious to see how you guys feel about this, right? The Beyonder versus the Phoenix. I'm curious to see what you guys think. So one of the first things the Beyonder does is he basically makes a food processor, because the Beyonder can just do virtually anything it wants to and just craft something out of nothing, right? It's just the nature of the Beyonder's power. He's as close as you get to God. But the funny thing about this is that when Loki asks the question, the Beyonder says, I made it when we landed. Forging the base quarks, that was the hard part, right? Basically, making it was the hard hard part. Do you want to blend anything? I find its comforting in moments like this. And when Loki asks, moments like what? The response of the Beyonder, moments when I'm outclassed, silly. If you hadn't trapped me in a narrative arc, I'd never have come here. I mean, I'm omnipotent, of course, technically speaking, but against the pure Phoenix Force, actually inside the white-hot room, we're probably going to end up like Mr. Carrot here. So what Al Ewing is establishing is the Phoenix Force in its most pure form is more powerful than the Beyonder. Now, there's room to make this argument here. There's room to make this argument because remember, every single time anyone's ever gone up against the Beyonder, Rachel Summers when she was the Phoenix fighting the Beyonder in Secret Wars 2, when Cyclops was killed by God King Doom wielding the power of the Beyonders, when he had the Phoenix Force, or at least when Cyclops had the Phoenix Force, every time we've seen the Phoenix face off against the Beyonder, it's always been the Phoenix with a physical host. And the Phoenix's power is always diminished when it has a physical host because outside of Jean Grey, no one's been able to wield the full totality of the Phoenix and become the White Phoenix of the Crown in its most pure form. So Al Ewing is actually going with credible evidence here, right? Given the fact that the Phoenix Force is absolute power, life incarnate, it stands to reason you could make an argument the Phoenix could defeat the Beyonder. Now, some people will kind of like say, no, that's ridiculous, largely because it's just like the Beyonder is supposed to be like the most powerful being out there next to God. And if we're talking about the original Beyonder from Secret Wars 1 and 2, yes, but lest we forget, in the Fantastic Four stories that were done back in the day, that retcon happened. The Beyonder's power was reduced by about half. So that kind of begs the question in terms of a tried and true Beyonder, which is what this guy now is, would the Phoenix be able to defeat it? I'm not 100% sure. There's no definitive answer here because I don't think there's really any credible evidence to offer either way outside of some stuff the Phoenix has done, some stuff the Beyonder's done, comparing the two of them and coming to a conclusion. So here's what I want. The comic book YouTube community, not just the fans, anybody in the comic book YouTube community who wants to get into this, give me an answer, because I'm curious, right? I mean, I'm sure people are going to power scale, do a little bit of cooking of the books, but, you know, let me know, right? What do you think would actually happen here? Like, do you think the pure Phoenix Force could actually defeat the Beyonder, that it is more powerful than the Beyonder? I'm curious, right? Somebody give me some answers here, because honestly, I'm excited to see if anybody could figure it out. But the thing about this is that once this sort of statement is known, right? Once this thing is known, we basically jump back to, of course, the Phoenix sort of taunting Loki and the Beyonder a little bit. The Loki's kind of ignoring her more than anything else. And one of the things that Phoenix says is that that version of Loki has to be destroyed because it's a Loki out of time. Remember, that's one of the things that we covered, that leading up to Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, Marvel had stories that were called The Last Days of whoever in the heck was in that story. In this instance, The Last Days of Loki, that Loki basically skipped over the entirety of Secret Wars, went through a portal, went back in time, and that's how he's here. But Loki is not actually supposed to be here right now. He's supposed to be dead. He was supposed to have been wiped away with everything, right, with the multiverse, and then be reborn as his current self. So it's one of those weird things. It's a little weird and a little murky and kind of wonky, but just understand this version of Loki is not supposed to exist. And so that's what the Phoenix is talking about here when it says you're supposed to be burned away, you're supposed to be gone. But switching over to this fight between Blue Marvel, Adam Brashear, and the Phoenix Force, the fight between the two is really, really intriguing here. And the reason why is because Al Ewing is building on this in the sense that, one, Al Ewing is probably the second most prolific writer of Adam Brashear outside of Kevin Grievous, who made him, right? For those of you guys who aren't really familiar with that, Kevin Grievous made Adam Brashear. And then Al Ewing wrote the Heroic Age story, I believe, where Adam Brashear fought Hyperion from a different universe. But after that, all of the appearances of Adam Brashear's character in Marvel Comics have all been written by Al Ewing. The Mighty Avengers, led by Luke Cage, was Al Ewing. The Ultimates, Al Ewing. This is all Al Ewing that's been writing his character. So he's pretty well versed in what he's capable of. The Phoenix Force, for all of its power and all of its bravado and all of its abilities, is a being made of positive matter. So there is room, albeit Al Ewing kind of fudging the numbers a little bit, there is room for Adam Brashear to either be comparable to the Phoenix Force, if only temporarily, or at least to negate its power, because it's antimatter versus positive matter. So again, it's interesting here. It's one of those ways where it's basically Blue Marvel kind of getting a power boost, or Adam Brashear getting a power boost, one that we hadn't normally seen before, because this will be referenced across the internet. People will say, well, there was that time when Adam Brashear went toe-to-toe against the Phoenix, and then somebody's going to come back and say, yeah, but this, and that person's going to come back and say, yeah, but that, and that's how it works on the internet. But it's just one of those interesting things, because in the midst of the fight between the two, you do have the Beyonder and Loki who show up, and the Beyonder throws a food processor at the Phoenix and hits her in the head, which is kind of weird. But it's one of those things where what it does is it offers a momentary reprieve, because it allows America Chavez, who's basically returned, to jump in and fight the Phoenix. Now remember, America Chavez has the Eternity Mask, which grants her power that's equal to whoever she's facing off against. That's not even an Al Ewing invention as far as I'm aware. This thing's been around for years and years and years in Marvel Comics. What it does is it allows everybody else the time they need to basically start trying to figure out a way out of there. And that's where you have Adam Brashear, who starts talking directly to the construction worker. And it's kind of a cool thing, because while the construction worker is doing all of this, Al Ewing does kind of hint to the idea that the construction worker is not associated with the Phoenix, that it's not necessarily directly with the Phoenix itself. And in fact, one of the things the construction worker says is, he says, this place is a place of balance between light and dark, compassion and severity, mercy and destruction. Your friends are acting out that balance. There's an argument for letting you all journey on, just as there's an argument for burning you to nothing. And so Adam asks, like, that's not a debate that I want to risk playing out. Do you have any advice, mysterious stranger? And this guy says, me? I just work here. You're the one leading Eternity's defenders. You're the one calling the plays. And so it's an interesting thing, because what this guy looks like is, again, he's not associated with the Phoenix Force, which is to say, he's not a part of the Phoenix. Now, there is a person in Marvel Comics recently that has been talking about balance. And if any of you guys have read the newer Thanos one-shot that came out that recently retold his origin, which we'll cover tomorrow, that Mistress Death says that Mistress Death is like, no, Thanos is acting out of balance, right? He's playing a balance, that kind of thing. So whether or not this is actually Mistress Death is just one of those things that's a mystery. But again, it is cool to see that there's this kind of figure out there that doesn't really have a direct relation to the Phoenix per se. So again, it's sort of fascinating here, because in the midst of all this, you have Adam Brashear that comes to this realization that with somebody like Tigra, she's a lot more powerful than she initially appears. Now, here's the thing about Greer Nelson. One, I know most of you guys don't care about Greer, and that's fair. She sucks, she always has, and she's never been interesting. But the thing about her character is that she gained her powers, and she plays a role similar to T'Challa of the Black Panther mythos, where T'Challa is an avatar of the Panther goddess Bast. Tigra is an avatar of what is basically the Tiger Force, or the Tiger God, if you want to call it that. It all goes back to her origin, her professor named Tumulo, who basically turned out to be a guy that was involved with a whole bunch of magicians that worshipped like a tiger god. It's weird, and it's wonky, and it's Marvel Comics back in the day, and it's one of those stories that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. The important thing here is she's got a level of power that she didn't know she had, and she's never tapped into before. And so in doing so, what it does is that by utilizing this power of the tiger god, she kind of communes with it, channels its abilities, and then goes onto the affront, basically attacking the Phoenix. Now, again, this is Al Ewing kind of offering this idea. The Phoenix Force is powerful, but it's not the most powerful being out there. Beyond that, what it's also saying is that, yeah, it's more powerful than the Beyonder, but there are gods out there that are more powerful than the Phoenix. What you're witnessing here over the course of this story is Al Ewing giving us a wholesale reshuffling of the Marvel cosmic landscape, of the power hierarchy. Because in years past, in Marvel Comics, right, in years past, what you had is you had the one above all, then you had the Beyonder, then you had the Molecule Man, then you had everybody else, right? The Living Tribunal and Eternity, and their powers fluctuated based on the situation and who was writing the stories, so on and so forth, right? Then you had the introduction of characters like the Marquis of Death, Clyde Wincham, which elevated him to a higher position. You had characters with caveats, so like Thanos with the Astral Regulator, or Thanos with the Heart of the Universe, or Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet, or whatever plot device Marvel wants to create so he can go on some crazy omnipotent scheme. But whatever the case is, like, you always had this kind of established hierarchy among the cosmic entities, the gods, so on and so forth. There's never been an instance where we've ever looked at a character like Bast or any earthly based god and considered the possibility that they would be on par with something as astronomically powerful as the Phoenix. The Phoenix permeates the multiverse. Bast is just a being over there who sits in that chair and appears sometimes in Marvel Comics. And like, that's it. right? So like this god, this goddess, this Tiger god, kind of falls in the same vein. So it is interesting to see Al Ewing just reshuffling so much of this. What the purpose is, I'm not entirely sure. That's why stories like this can kind of go either way. Either this story is one where what's happening here is going to permeate throughout the entirety of the MCU, so they're making things a little more reasonable so the Marvel Cinematic Universe can match it. The alternative is Al Ewing's doing this because he wants to, and he can, right? Because it's Al Ewing, and I'll read anything this guy does, and it's awesome, right? So I mean, again, it's just one of those funny and sort of wonky situations. But in the midst of this whole thing, while this fight's going on between basically the Phoenix and the Tiger God, again, it gives the Defenders the chance to move beyond the realm of the White Hot Room and into what's called the Abyss, the place beyond. Now, once they're here, they initially have no idea what's here. Everything's black and white. There's no real color here or anything. Everything's just sort of drained out, almost as if it's things that haven't necessarily come to fruition yet. But the funny thing is, when they start asking questions and saying, like, what in the world's going on here? Like, everything just feels so wrong in this place. A disembodied voice comes out of nowhere and says, of course it does. You all died by fire, and now you're in the Abyss with me. But don't worry, even here, Glorian can make your dreams come true. Now, here's the thing about Glorian, right? For those of you guys who don't know anything about this guy is 8 kinds of broken. This guy's just like 8, and not even just physically. The level of power this guy has is nuts. He's the most powerful being in Marvel Comics that you've never heard of, because this guy draws his power from the Shaper of Worlds, and the Shaper of Worlds is literally a walking, talking cosmic cube. That's basically what this guy is. This guy can do anything. Now, in years past, he hasn't been a being that was on par with the Phoenix or more powerful than the Phoenix or even the Beyonders. But what it looks like Al Ewing is doing here is saying that in this place, right, the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, which is exactly what the Abyss is, that Glorian is the most powerful man walking. And I'm curious to see what in the world comes out of this. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Defenders Beyond, and we are here with 2 of the most powerful beings that you've never heard of, one of whom is a cosmic entity. So what this does here, picking up off the heels of the last video, is it initially picks up with Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel, right? And so this guy actually saves President Kennedy from being taken out by Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, of course, he appears to President Kennedy and is just kind of like, imagine what would have happened if I'd have learned about this on TV. And he even goes as far as to tell him, like, you better have your concession speech ready, Mr. Kennedy, because the next time you hear from me, it's going to be in the primaries. And then following that, it picks up really in kind of the present day, after Blue Marvel has won the presidency and of course retired. The presidency was decades ago, and then in turn it's just kind of celebrating with all the different members of the Avengers. And you'll notice the Avengers look different than they normally do. Spider-Man is still wearing the suit that he got in Secret Wars. The Beyonder is currently around, which he's not technically part of the Avengers. You're seeing a team and a group of people that don't necessarily exist in their current form. Tigra, for whatever reason that makes sense to nobody but Al Ewing, is basically the leader of the Avengers and has the power to lift Thor's hammer. It's one of these funny things, because what you're seeing here is an alteration of reality. As most of you guys know from reading the history of Adam Brashear in Marvel Comics, he was asked to step down by President Kennedy, and where this story really seems to maintain that conversation between the two, unlike what we saw in the main Marvel Universe with Adam Brashear, in this reality, he chose not to step down, and in fact, he ignored President Kennedy's order and continued operating as a superhero, and was then successfully elected to the presidency of the United States. From there, you pick up with America Chavez, who has her sister in tow and is also met with her mothers in the Utopian Parallel, the real Utopian Parallel, right? So her mothers are alive. Beyond that, you have the arrival of Taaia, the mother of Galactus, and when she gets there, of course, Galactus is in tow, which gives us the return of Lifebringer Galactus. Now, we're going to make sense of all this here in a second, because it's important that you understand what's going on here. Beyond the different alterations of reality involving like the Avengers and so on and so forth, this ties into the work that Al Ewing's done already. So for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Taaia and are unfamiliar with the Lifebringer, Taaia was introduced in the main Defenders story that was written by Al Ewing. Technically, Defenders Beyond is kind of a spin-off slash sort of ending of the Defenders story as Al Ewing had done it. But Taaia was brought in when you basically had the Defenders who had transitioned to the previous reality before the current one, and they had discovered the parents of Galactus. Now, it was kind of Al Ewing reworking everything, sort of adjusting everything to sort of fit his needs. But the thing about this this is that Lifebringer Galactus originated in Al Ewing's Ultimates run. That in All New, All Different Marvel, when the Ultimates were launched, which was honestly, if I'm being quite frank with you guys, the Ultimates comic book was the best comic that no one was reading, right? That thing was the best thing going in All New, All Different Marvel. And I don't care what anybody says. It was a ridiculously phenomenal story. Check this out. The team was nuts. You had the Blue Marvel who led the team. You had Black Panther, America Chavez, Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, and then eventually you had Anti-Man Connor Sims. It was nuts. Like, it was so powerful. The first thing they did was fight and overpower Galactus and then continue his evolution, right? The situation that Al Ewing presented was that when Galactus emerged and started consuming worlds, that he hadn't fully evolved. What the Ultimates did is they evolved him to his final form, which was the Lifebringer. So he literally started traveling around the universe, bringing back all the worlds that he had previously consumed. It was pretty awesome. The crazy thing about this is that we get this kind of monologue coming from America Chavez where she says that for a moment, all of this just feels perfect. All of us together in celebration in an ideal world. There's not even any villains, which really begs the question, why do the Avengers even exist in the first place, right? That this whole thing is perfect and that it's too perfect. She realizes there's something on her face, that she's wearing the Eternity Mask, and that's when she breaks free of this false reality, and we realize that none of what she's seeing is actually real. Now, of course, Glorian is the one behind all of this, and he even goes so far as to alter reality and to say, okay, fine, if what you want is the real Galactus, then here's the real Galactus. And he shows her just like this monstrosity Galactus, like as we know him, right? The devourer of worlds. And it's kind of nuts because you have him really talking to America Chavez and coming to this realization, the Eternity Mask, even outside all universes, some things are universal, and it makes you the equal of anyone you fight. So it gives you the power to break free of my illusory worlds. But why would you want to fight me? Look what it's doing to all of the others. And so he goes as far as to tell America Chavez, look at Taaia finally confronting the knowledge of what her little Gallon would become when that universe that they're in dies and he's born into the new universe. I could give her false hope again if you ask. And when America Chavez asks, what is this place? His response is, I told you, you're in the abyss, the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, the furthest place from reality there is. Nothing happens here. There are no stories. And it's one of those things because what Marvel really gives us and what Al Ewing's been doing, kind of consolidating really everything he's done in Marvel Comics so far, especially considering what we have here, is that as we mentioned in the last video, you have a universe, right? The main Marvel universe, if we want to call it that. Beyond the main Marvel universe, you have the multiverse. Beyond the multiverse, you have the Beyond realm, where the Beyonders reside. Beyond that, you have the White Hot room, where the White Phoenix of the Crown resides. And then beyond that, you have this, the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be. Now, the funny thing about this is that Al Ewing didn't invent any of these. Outside of like the Far Shore, which is basically where cosmic entities go to die, and by all standards of measurement is the realm of the one above all, and I don't necessarily know how you reconcile that place with this place. The important thing here is that in these locations, right, in these realms, it was all invented before him. The land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, as far as I'm aware, that was invented by Dan Slott in his Silver Surfer run. Now, the thing about the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, is that this is the place where basically only ideas reside, things that have never really come to fruition, right? So if the possibility exists out there, this is where that possibility resides before it becomes real. It's a very metatextual realm. But again, Glorian is the one that rules in this realm, seemingly at this place. Now, the reason why I say this guy's so astronomically powerful is because what this guy does is remove a piece of himself and create a whole entire multiverse out of it, like a multiverse of possibilities. Because as he's talking to America Chavez, he says, you're the one that's breaking things around here, America Chavez. What I want is to make these things true. Before I died, before I was trapped here, I had the chance to become the living personification of the multiverse. And my eighth cosmos would not have been a mere continuation. It would have been a cosmic reboot, a new beginning for everyone. What he's referring to is basically the universe as it exists now after the events of Secret Wars 2015. Remember, Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run basically detailed the idea of the Beyonders intending to wipe out the entirety of the multiverse. Had they been successful, the multiverse would have restarted because it's the natural order of things. But what Glorian is saying here is that in his mind, what he would have done after becoming the embodiment of all things in existence, the entirety of the multiverse, he would have rebooted. In some ways, I have to believe this is Al Ewing basically saying, if I were the one running the show, I would have rebooted the entire landscape of Marvel Comics. He says, look, America Chavez, look at what the dead land could be. And that's when it kind of astonishes her, because she's like, you're using your own substance to make an entire multiverse. And he says, for now, but if you choose this paradise that I've made for you, give it something of yours, we can keep it going together, i.e., if you believe in this, and if you choose to become a part of this reality, you will now exist in an alternate reality. You'll exist in an alternate universe because you believing in it has given it form. It's one of those really, really cool but metatextual things. And in fact, Glorian says, like, look at what I've done for all of you, right? Adam Brashear has the answer to the one question that torments him, what might have been. Taaia gets to be proud of her son. Tigra's an A-lister with the respect of her peers, which is kind of funny because the reality is she's not an A-lister and no one cares about Tigra. And he says even the Beyonder is finally content in this world, surrounded by people who basically adore him. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you, America Chavez, you could have everything that you ever wanted. You could have your sister, your moms are alive, the utopian parallel is a place that you can go to. You can have a home. He says you can have the life that you've always wanted. Don't you feel like you deserve it? And her response isn't necessarily no to the question of does she deserve it? It's no to, do I want to live in this world? And she's like, I'll stick with what I've got. Now, that's what's so interesting about all this, is because the reality is that for us as people, right, for you, me, anybody else, our life is in some ways kind of governed and mired by the question, what if I had done this differently, right? Like, what if I had taken $100 and invested it in Bitcoin when it was trading at a fraction of a penny? I'd be a billionaire right now. I'd be astronomically rich. Well, maybe not with $100, but like, you'd have a lot more money than you have right now, right? Like, what if I had made this decision regarding college instead of that decision? What if I had gone to a trade school instead of college, right? What if I had done this or that or any number of things? I think for us as people, it's natural to look at the decisions that we've made over the course of our lives and to wonder, what if we had done something different? This conversation between Gloria and America Chavez and even the other members of the Defenders who jump in, Taaia showing up and saying, this is the kingdom of never, the true world of couldn't be, shouldn't be. If Galen plays Big Hungry in the cosmos to come, he has a key role in future history. That's the role that he's supposed to play. To fix him up, quote unquote, would be to wipe him out. And when Glorian's saying things like, I would do a reboot after reboot, right? I would just reboot over and over and over again until I got, quote unquote, the perfect universe, until I got it right. The response to Taaia is like, is that really what it's going to be? Us as individuals here are just playthings for you to just kind of rewrite reality on your whim until you figure out what it is? Even Blue Marvel says, I'd rather live my own life, whether I made the right choices or not, than some cozy historical fiction. This is them sort of looking at Glorian and saying, like, yes, we could kind of have this perfect world as you created, and yes, our lives would be rebooted over and over again, but the truth is, we are the people that we are because of the choices that we made. And so it's really kind of intriguing here, because when you have Glorian who says, okay, fine, like, nobody else is going to side with me, right? Fine, whatever, you guys are going to reject all this, that's cool. With the power of the Beyonder, I can draw on that, and everything will be cool. If I can get the Beyonder to agree with this, I can draw on the Beyonder's power and do seemingly anything that I want to. And the funny thing about the Beyonder is, true, you could. I do have unlimited power. I could do virtually anything that I want to. I'm one of the most powerful beings in existence, but the reality is, my only real desire is to understand desire. And seeing the Defenders resist your offers, well, that was just simply fascinating. And it makes me want to hear from all 5 of them, not the 4 that you've set free. And so he ultimately unleashes Loki and then brings Loki in. Now, the funny thing about this is, remember, Loki as he exists now is the god of stories, and they're in the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, which means it's basically like writing on an empty page. Whatever Loki puts there becomes an absolute truth. That's the way this works. His power literally runs the opposite of Glorian's power. Glorian is imbued by all the possibilities that can exist, but he's limited to whatever Loki does, right? And so literally at that point going forward, Loki gets the Eternity Mask, right? right? It's literally handed to him by America Chavez. That makes him equal to Glorian. At that point, he just starts writing the narrative. He's just like, okay, cool, like, let's see what we can do. Loki holding this mask, he literally says, oh, I get it. The mask is a piece of eternity's substance. With a handful of this, Glorian really could have made his dream world real, infected eternity from the inside. But unlike certain moldy golden oldies, I think outside the box. And so where he's begged by Glorian, the response of Loki is, see what I mean? Dull, dull, dull. You've got nothing I want, Glorian, not even a fight. Being equal to you is a step down with me wielding this eternity mask. But what else can I use a little piece of eternity for? Maybe to contact other cosmic entities? Who is a multiversal personification that I've got on speed dial? And this is when he draws the Queen of Nevers. Now, the Queen of Nevers is a ridiculously powerful cosmic entity, and depending on who's writing the story and how you handle it, her power could transcend that of the living tribunal. She'd be second to the one above all, and the reason why is because she represents the sum total of any and all possibilities. The possibility of the living tribunal being destroyed and never returning, the possibility of the one above all dying. She represents all these different things, and so as a result of that, her power is a reflection of that. Now again, it's one of these things where it's fast and loose. Some of you guys may kind of draw the conclusion, well, in that case, she's more powerful than the one above all. I mean, no, like Marvel does create a definitive hierarchy. The one above all is called the one above all for a reason. But she says, I'm called the Queen of Nevers, who is also Queen of Always. That it's one of those things where it's like anything that is possible, I represent. I represent all these different things. And so literally she whisks the defenders away from Glorian and brings them directly to her realm. And so that's where she says that much like eternity and infinity, she exists as a sort of balance here, right? That where eternity represents time and infinity represents space, that the Queen of Nevers, one part of her does represent couldn't be, shouldn't be, things that should never happen, things that should never take place, and things that can never take place because they shouldn't take place. But she also represents can be, shall be, which means things that can take place, therefore there are things that will take place, right? Basically, the ideas that Marvel Comics writers have, that Marvel's approved of. I mean, if we're being honest here and we're using metatextual stuff, this Marvel editorial is saying, you know what, we'll go ahead and go with that idea. That idea resides in the land of can be, shall be. The ideas where Marvel's just like, no, we're never gonna do that. That resides in the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be, right? If we're using comics as a metatextual kind of representation of how Marvel does things, that's really how this stuff works. But again, what we have here is her talking about this notion of unchecked possibility, right? That unchecked possibility is definitively freedom. Even in your world, you'd be surprised at what can actually happen. Again, it's sort of this Al Ewing commentary on the fact that this idea of thinking that your life is somehow limited, right? Like you have to work a 9 to 5 because it's the only way to find success and it's the only way to retire, right? Like that's limited thinking. I make a living rambling about comic books for 30 minutes, right? Like, don't talk to me about what can or cannot be done. Your ability to achieve things in your life or in this life, especially in this digital age when everything is accessible at your fingertips, it's limited only by your imagination, right? It's one thing that I would love for you guys to take away from this is that at the end of the day, your ability to live your life and the things that you can achieve in your life is limited by your imagination. The important thing here is this, right? That in this conversation that takes place between like the defenders and so on, Loki says, but how come you're here instead of back there in the world that we came from? Not to be a downer, but I've experienced what's quote unquote possible there, and it absolutely hurt because Loki was turned into a tree. But she says, I'm on my journey, you're on yours, and none of us have the map. But she says, I can promise you one thing, my cynical storyteller, the journey never ends. Not even when we pass through the final door, defenders, the door to the godhood itself. And what she does is she presents them to the door of God and says, this door here, it leads to the house of ideas. Now, where that leads to, we'll find out in the next video. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Defenders Beyond, and this is the conclusion, and yes, the one above all makes his return. Now, this story is going to shift up everything you know about the one above all, and I love the way that it's done, right? So, in the last video that we did, we basically picked up with kind of the conclusion of that little bit of a story, that the Defenders were effectively moving to what was called the House of Ideas. Now, this is a phrase that Al Ewing is using both in terms of the story, but as well as the real world. And the reason why is because Marvel Comics used to be called the House of Ideas. That was kind of their great big huge tag name. And so with that being the case, once Adam Brashear gets in here and he's met by the one above all, he's basically given the same line that more or less the one above all gives most everybody, right? I see through many eyes, I build with many hands. They are themselves, but they are also me. I am all powerful. My only weapon is love. The mystery intrigues me. I am as I am. I will be what I will be. I am the one above all. Now, to that, Adam Brashear's just kind of like, I don't think that's true. Now, that's one of the crazy things about this is because in response to that, the one above all launches an attack against them using all these different monsters. Now, here's the cool thing about this. If you're familiar with Marvel Comics, this is actually Al Ewing using Marvel's publishing history and then bringing it into the comic book. And the reason why I say that is because for those of you guys who are not really familiar with the history of Marvel, long before Marvel was Marvel, you had Timely Comics. Timely Comics is where you got Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, who created like Captain America, right? Captain America Comics #1. Now, once superheroes stopped being popular after World War II, Timely Comics changed its name to Atlas Comics. And what Atlas Comics did, which is really where Stan Lee got his start, Atlas Comics was focusing on science fiction, monsters, different things like that. It wasn't until the 1960s with really Fantastic Four #1 that Marvel Comics became the Marvel Comics that we know. And this is so cool because these monsters you're seeing here, these are the old stories that Marvel published before superheroes emerged. So it's really one of these things where it's kind of Al Ewing offering this kind of commentary and saying like the one above all has always existed. It's always been around. It's been since the beginning of everything. And so these monsters that it's spewing out are the creatures that existed before like the multiverse exists as it exists now, which is why they're kind of referred to as like the beast from before or whatever the case happens to be. Now, the Defenders are able to get the upper hand on these guys pretty quickly, and for the most part, they're able to kind of take them out, but these beings are pretty powerful. And so in the midst of all this, what you do is you have Adam Brashear who says, I don't believe in any god who tests their creations. I've been tested enough, all of humanity has, but I do believe in a god who questions us and who asks us to question them. And that's when the one above all stops, and it simply says, then speak, if you have understanding. And so this is where things get amazing, right? Because what Adam Brashear says here, really, he says like, there's no power that we can reach above yours. You're as high as we can go. That's what defines you. But does that truly make you above all? He says this is only the beginning of the journey, isn't it? The beginning of what you represent and what creates creation. Now, this is the thing, because his question, right, his statement, what creates creation, that's where the one above all responds. It says the place where the world of action ends and the world of creation begins. So for those of you guys who are unfamiliar, the one above all in Marvel Comics has historically been the top person, right? And different depictions of the one above all have taken place. For example, there was a story where the Fantastic Four met the one above all, and the one above all was depicted as Jack Kirby. There's been instances where it's been alluded that the one above all is basically Stan Lee. There was a point where the one above all appeared to Peter Parker and did not look like Stan Lee or Jack Kirby. So the one above all has always been kind of depicted as just this exceedingly powerful being and is the creation or the reason why all things exist. There's even this idea that the one above all is basically Marvel Publishing, right? The kind of combination of the writers, the artists, the editors, the editor-in-chief, everybody who decides what gets published in Marvel. But what Al Ewing is doing here is he's putting forward this idea that the cosmic hierarchy as we've seen it up to this point, the Phoenix Force, the Beyonders, so on and so forth, that's all just the tangible realm, right? That's a being out there who's really powerful and can do some stuff. What the one above all represents is the entrance into a whole nother level of hierarchy that exists out there as far as people who create things, right? Those individuals who are capable of creation. That when you have someone like the one above all, everybody who exists throughout the entirety of the Marvel multiverse would be powerless in the face of the one above all, because all it has to do is just wipe them from existence. And there's no conceivable means of bringing them back unless the one above all chooses to. That's the way its character always operated. But what Al Ewing is doing is saying the one above all is just the first in a new line of just these astronomically powerful cosmic beings that exist out there that are in charge of creating everything. And so it's a really, really awesome concept because this is a level of power we've never seen before. And so again, where you have Adam Brashear talking with the one above all and asking what creates creation above everything, even your creators? Is there a final guiding hand? Can there be? Do you know one above all? The response is, the mystery intrigues me, Adam. I have my answers from you. What do you wish from me? And so that's when you kind of get this sort of statement that's made, right? Each one kind of asking for something in particular. Taaia wants to know what's going on with her son, right? Galactus becoming the world devourer, because remember, she comes from the universe where Galactus originated before he ever became Galactus. But what the one above all says here is, Taaia, your son becomes the devourer of worlds, right? He's born into your reality as your son. Your universe and the multiverse will basically end. It'll be reborn, and he will be born into the new universe and even the new multiverse as Galactus. This is by my design. I intended it to be this way. So it's not some kind of grand cosmic mistake, despite the fact that it shocked you to learn that your son would become a person that just eradicates entire worlds in the new universe. It's just how I wanted things to be. And he says, but you cannot return to your cosmos with that knowledge. Now, of course, America Chavez asks about her sister. Al Ewing's response is, you will find her and more. Nothing that was made is ever lost, America Chavez. Tigra kind of wants to know what her purpose is, and the one above all is just like, you have no real purpose, Tigra. And so as a result of that, you basically have this really cool instance where Adam Brashear asked the question, okay, the Defenders have a mission to complete. We were charged by eternity to travel into the cosmos and to find this grand cosmic threat. And so far, we found nothing. We've only found a hierarchy of cosmic beings. What's this grand threat? And what the one above all says, and this is going to be mind-boggling insane. The one above all says, behold and take what you can understand. The grail at the end of your quest is a single glimpse of the enigma to come. And so what they're looking at here, to the best of their ability to interpret it, is simply just a giant crown that stretches across all things that exist. And literally, Adam Brashear says it's a crown above all things. And so he simply says it's up to us to decode the cosmic symbolism. So basically, Al Ewing is just like, there is a source of power that exists out there that is beyond the one above all. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have to wait to find out what it is. Because I'm not gonna tell you. Now, as most people are suspecting, this is only the second part in the trilogy. That you have the Defenders comic, which was written by Al Ewing. This is part 2, which is, you could argue it is like the Empire Strikes Back of the Defenders comic. Terrible analogy, I know. Just go with me on that. But then part 3 will be the Return of the Jedi, but hopefully it'll be better than the movie. But it'll be like the part 3 that kind of wraps everything up. But it's one of those interesting concepts, because in that moment, Loki chimes in and says, okay, so here's the thing. In our quest, when we were all brought together by basically the soul of Doctor Strange, we were shown a crown on the tarot cards. So this is the threat that we have to find some way to defeat. But ultimately, we have no earthly clue how to do this. We have no earthly clue how to pull this off. And so what Loki actually reveals is that the coming together of the Defenders as it exists, while it was orchestrated by Doctor Strange, Loki went along with it because what Loki seeks to do is to actually leave. That the power of the realm of the one above all is that because it exists out there in the space where things are created, it exists outside the multiverse. Loki seeks to leave everything, walk away from the multiverse, the whole 9 yards. You could make a convincing argument here that what Loki's saying is he wants to enter basically into the real world. He wants to leave the world of fiction and enter into the real world. Now, the funny thing about this is that what we're also really given here is that while the Defenders don't necessarily get into a big conversation about it, they're all basically coming to this realization they're fictional characters. Their stories are guaranteed. The things that happen in their lives happen because they're supposed to, because they were created that way, right? Adam Brashear facing off against Ant-Man Connor Sims, Loki and all his stories, America Chavez, and so on and so forth. It's all pre-written. It's like when Deadpool discovered that he was a fictional character. It's just that they're not killing the entirety of the Marvel Universe. But it's a cool thing because, of course, the Beyonder seemingly shows up out of nowhere in the midst of all this. But the idea behind it is that you do have Loki kind of given this idea that he could legitimately just leave. It's an opportunity available to him, that he could just walk away. He could leave the omniverse, the multiverse, step out into the real world. But the other part of this is that Adam Brashear chimes in with what's something that's known as the Bodhisattva vow. Now, I'm probably butchering the hell out of that pronunciation. I apologize if I am. But the entire idea behind this vow is, at least as far as the story goes, is that you had somebody named Siddhi Garbha, I think is how you pronounce that. Again, I'm terrible when it comes to pronunciations like that. But this person vowed not to attain Buddhahood until all hells were emptied, because there is no enlightenment until all are enlightened. There is no freedom until all are free. And so the important thing here, and this is what's kind of nuts about this, the kind of stuff Al Ewing's throwing out here, the revelation by Adam Adam Brashear and the Defenders that they're fictional characters, Loki trying to leave and walk away, right? This idea of a statement being made directly to Loki that at the end of the day, he's like, reality wants me in some old shape. It wants me to be what I used to be. And the kind of counter statement being like, do you think that it can, God of Stories? Like, do you think it didn't try? That kind of situation. This is all moving or all kind of pointing towards the idea of a massive paradigm shift in Marvel Comics, that this notion of what they're kicking off, or at least what they're alluding to, is some massive reworking of the landscape. And the reason why I say that is because all of this puts forward the idea that the Defenders themselves, accessing the realm of the one above all, learning the fictional history of characters, it can all be changed. It can be rewritten, that they are given a status quo, but they can leave the status quo. They can alter the status quo. They can change what they want their stories to be. It kind of smells like a bit of a reboot to a degree. Now, I don't know if that's gonna happen. It's probably me just as a Marvel Comics fan saying like, it's high time you guys reboot. We know that like Jonathan Hickman and Marvel are working on something massive coming out in 2023 this year. It's supposed to happen in the summer. I don't know if it's gonna be a reboot. Marvel needs to reboot. Mariah literally just finished Secret Wars, and I asked her, doesn't that story end where it felt like it was supposed to be a reboot? And she's like, yeah, do they reboot? And I was like, nope. And she's like, that sucks, because it feels like they were supposed to reboot. Like, it's kind of what it feels like to me. But again, it may just be me as the person wanting Marvel to reboot, kind of feeding my own desire, right? But the important thing is that the Beyonder himself had actually gone along with this whole thing just to see if he could. That the reality of the Beyonder is that it doesn't want to go back to the second cosmos. It doesn't want to go back to its place where it just hangs around and waits until something pops off with the Celestials and the Beyonders have to step in. That it doesn't really give us a whole lot of expose into like their mindset regarding Secret Wars, the Avengers, the new Avengers run by Jonathan Hickman, the collapse of the multiverse. But what it does say is this desire is to literally leave everything in creation and see what all's out there, to see if it could possibly even just create its own thing. And so what happens is this realm is basically destroyed by the Beyonder, and then it literally takes off into parts unknown. We have no idea where his story goes. And it could very well be the Beyonder does achieve a whole new level of power, or the Beyonder potentially even takes the power of the one above all, which is just downright scary. But the thing about this is Al Ewing kind of setting the seeds for all these different character stories going forward, right? Loki still has the Eternity Mask, and while he does end up traveling back to Earth, he goes back to his place. What this means is that with Eternity's Mask, his power is equal to whoever he faces off against. If he fights the one above all, his power becomes equal to the one above all. That's how the Eternity Mask works. There's no limit to it. And while you do have Taaia, who is supposed to go back to her reality, the response of Adam Brashear is, but the one above all didn't say when. All the one above all said is that you cannot go back to your universe with knowledge of what your son becomes, because you may warn your son, you may stop him from becoming Galactus. Whatever the case happens to be, these things kind of have to happen because the character exists. Therefore, the circumstances must exist for him to exist the way that he does. And so she basically just kind of lingers around. She becomes a part of the Defenders. She effectively joins the team. But again, Al Ewing leaves it open-ended. He's just like, yeah, I mean, they haven't found, like, they know it's the crown, but they don't know what it means, and they haven't really found the main enemy itself. It's just kind of a glimpse of what awaits them. So what it looks like is going into presumably this quote-unquote third part of the Defender story, things are going to be crazy, and we're going to end up coming across cosmic entities with stupid levels of power that we didn't even know existed before. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Let me know what you think about this change with the one above all, and I will catch you all later. Peace.